Lumen Living presents Bedtime Thoughts with your girl, Dawn. I am so glad that God comforts us in our suffering. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 through 4 says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." I am so glad that God gives us the grace and mercy to be able to be delivered from those things that are hindering us. And when we overcome and we triumph over those things, we are able to be a help and a guide to those who are downtrodden and cast down by these things. It's time to have these conversations, guys, the hard ones.
Welcome to Bedtime Thoughts. It's your girl Dawn, and I'm here with my girl Octavia. And today we have a very special topic of discussion. So Octavia, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, where do I start? Well, firstly, I want to say thank you so much for having me, and it's just so nice to meet you. I know that even though we're on other sides of the world, I feel honestly we could be together right now, and I know that our personalities are just vibing. So yeah, I'm just really happy to be here. So I always think where do I start with these things? Because at the end of the day, I'm just your normal average girl, sort of within the chronic illness community. But I guess getting to the meat of things, what do I do? Who am I? So I am a certified mind-body coach or mind-body practitioner, and I specialize in autonomic nervous system regulation for people with chronic symptoms. And that is something that I do with people all over the world. It's very niche, but I love it. I love my job. It's just everything to me. And I love these kinds of things, meeting incredible humans all over the globe. And I feel so lucky to do what I do. So that's kind of who I am, what I do. I am British, as you can probably tell by my accent, but I actually moved from London mid-pandemic to South Africa, and I'm sure that will kind of come up in kind of my story and what I share today, kind of how that came about. So yeah, that's me.
Wow, so awesome. And just by your intro, I already know juicy details are about to come out in just a few short minutes. So I am so excited to get into our topic of discussion for today. We will be talking about workplace stress and burnout. I think we've all experienced some type of job that we didn't necessarily want to be there, or we couldn't flourish because we were so burnt out. And maybe it started exciting at first, and then as everything piles on, you just find yourself mentally exploding. But because you've got bills, you just keep going. You're like, okay, I'm gonna quit. And then that's what you think about, but then you get up, you get ready, and you still go and clock in. It's a never-ending cycle. So I would love to jump into your story, your experience as you dealt with workplace burnout and how you overcame this. Before we get into your story, though, we would like to share a verse of scripture that will be our key verse for our topic for today. And I'm going to be coming out of Isaiah chapter 40, verses 29. It says, "He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength." I had picked this because a lot of times, when we deal with burnout, we feel weakened as an individual. We feel powerless, almost hopeless, and we just kind of keep in this same rhythm. And what we said about doing the same thing with producing the same results is insanity, right? So we have to find a way to get out of that same routine of insanity. Anyways, Octavia, let's get into some stuff about you. So bring us to the beginning of everything. Like, you were working a job. Let's start there.
Okay, and also I just want to say, like, off the back of your intro, like, so many of the things that you said, like, really, really resonated with me. And I feel like even though we all have, you know, different experiences, different life experiences, different ways in which like things actually come about and happen to us, that I think the way that you describe like burnout and really kind of brought it to life is just like super, super accurate. So yeah, thank you for doing that. So let's think. Okay, so the start of my story. So I mean, essentially, where do I start? I mean, I was like your typical straight A student. I'm the eldest child. I feel like if you are the eldest child and you're watching this, you'll kind of just know kind of about what I mean by that. I essentially am the daughter of somebody who was in the military, so we moved around all the time, and it was very much a case of new country every 2 years, new school, often new language, and it was just a case of like, just get on with it. And it made for an incredible childhood, but it also made for some challenges and also some strong kind of conditioning of like, grind hard, you know, that's how we succeed, you know, like just keep pushing forward.
I do have a question about the languages. How many languages can you speak?
I speak 5 languages, not all fluently. I've had different variations of fluency as I've grown up, but I am completely bilingual in Spanish and English. I like grew up predominantly in Spain. I think I've spent a third of my life in Spain. Yeah.
Wow, I've always wanted to go to Spain. Is it beautiful?
Yeah, you must go. It's so beautiful. The people are really friendly. I feel like you fit in there like so well. They would just like embrace you, like, and just love having you there.
I need to go.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, those are all, I think, you know, looking back now, those were all little important things that played a role in this whole story. But I graduated from university with the best grades that I could possibly get, and I was very fortunate. I was like a real go-getter, driven, you know, like I made opportunities happen for me, if that makes sense. Like I was really unafraid of getting out there in the world. And you know what, I was so excited to be there. I felt like all of my hard work and my life and the opportunities that my parents had given me had led to like this amazing adult life of essentially going into the corporate world. That was always where I saw myself being, you know, wearing a suit, playing with the big boys, and just like building this amazing life for myself. So that's kind of where the story starts. And I'd actually, I think it was in my final year of university. I think in the US, is that college? Yeah. Am I saying that? Yeah, okay. So college, university, depending on where you're from. And it was in my final year, I did 4 years, that I got diagnosed with endometriosis. So, and I think that's actually, it was the first year where I kind of noticed that maybe I was experiencing some mental health challenges. And it was the first time that I actually reached out and started getting support for my mental health. But at this point, it was really from I don't want to say a place of naivety, because we're always doing the best that we can with the knowledge that we have at the time. But, you know, I just thought, okay, I'm struggling a little bit. I'll go to my local doctor. And I was kind of put in contact with people like that. And then I left university and everything seemed amazing. Like, you know, on the outside, I'd achieved everything, and I got my dream job. And that for me was in the pharmaceutical industry. It's sort of the first 6 months I was doing like a more generalized role, more within like the communication space. But after about 6 months, I sort of specialized very quickly into the world of pharma, so pharmaceuticals and healthcare and wellness, and that kind of thing. So that's the start of my story. And it's very much a case of everything seemed fine. So yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. I do like, so I know the pharmaceutical industry in America is probably different.
It is very different.
You were at London in that time, right?
I was, sorry, yes. So this was all happening in the UK. I went to university in the UK, in the Southwest, and then I moved. It was like this mass migration of young adults. Like in England, there is this almost like an unquestioned like mass migration from all of the different universities outside of London, and everyone moves into London and kind of goes into like shared houses together, because it's interesting. Like it was interesting looking back now that I never questioned that. I think there was a big push for me, as again, this is probably like a little important nuance in my story, but because I'd grown up all over the world, I think like wanting to fit in and just move to London with everyone else and kind of followed that path, and try and like put some roots down in my like country of birth and origin, if that makes sense, was kind of like something that played a role. But I never ever was, thought to myself, oh, is London a city that I like? Will it fit my lifestyle preferences? I just thought, okay, this is where all the jobs are. That's where everyone's going. Like, I think I didn't even give it a second thought, which is interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're at what age at this point, and you've entered the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah. So I am, good question. I want to say I was just turned 22.
Oh.
So to put this into context, I kind of secured, let's say, this internship. It was an internship that then kind of also turned out to be a kind of like on the go interview process for an actual permanent role at this place, which I guess is kind of not standard practice, but it happens a lot. It's like a frequent thing. But I worked flat out. This is also probably an important part of the story. So, because I think the thing is, and the reason I keep mentioning these little things, is the story actually started far earlier in my life than when the burnout actually started to manifest. You see, it's like the little clues that had that kind of thing that then led to everything that happened. But yeah, in my final year of university, I didn't work, like study, or I also had 2 jobs, which was just unnecessary, I think, at that point. Like I'd always worked throughout university. I'd always had this babysitting job, and then for some reason in my final year I decided to take on another job, and I didn't need it financially. It was just like, oh, I think that says a lot about my personality as well and conditioning. So I was working flat out there, and there were 2 days in my final year of university, Christmas Day and Easter Sunday, where I didn't work because I always had exams on my birthday, like always, just unfortunate birthday timing. And then I finished university in May, I think it was May, and I was literally like working in London, and I lived in, my family were based in Spain at the time, so it was literally like doing interviews, going over there, doing this internship, and I think I was basically like nearly immediately from one to the other, and then immediately after that internship went straight into full-time work. So again, looking back, it's like I took no time off.
No, you didn't.
None.
So
yeah,
talk to us about when this pharmaceutical internship turned into just a regular job that you were going to without that spark anymore,
Okay, yes, this is a very good question. So, I mean, essentially, I think I found out at the kind of end of that process that I was kind of up against 3 other candidates. And it's funny because it never crossed my mind that I wouldn't get the full-time job. I mean, I'd smashed the interview, but again, that was very much my mentality at that point. It was not I'm invincible, but I completely 100% back myself, and I'm probably one of the most hardworking people I know. I'm going to give this my all, and things tended to work out for me that way. And it did, and I joined this company, and honestly, I think I can't tell you, I was so unbelievably happy and fulfilled, particularly when I made the move from more generalized into more specialized pharmaceutical work, because I realized for me at university, I kind of, I don't want to say I rebelled against doing medicine. I really wanted to do medicine, but I, again, was a little bit naive at the grand old age of 17 when we're choosing these things. Like, I didn't realize that, for example, you can do medicine and not, for example, be a general practitioner or a doctor or be stuck in a lab, right? I could have done a whole other host of things with that, but I didn't know that at the time. So I kind of, that's what I mean by rebelled, or maybe kind of shied away from that path. And it took me a little while, like starting this new job, to realize that actually my passion was there, and I very quickly went like back into that space. And I loved it. I think for the first, like, let's say year, even though London is, I mean, it takes play hard, like work hard, play hard to a new level. There was a lot of like, you know, I think in the corporate world in England, there is a lot of like working very hard. My job was client facing. So there was a lot of like client entertainment. There was a lot of like social, you know, drinking and going out and that kind of thing, like with the company. And as like, you know, a young person straight out of university, I was given a lot of responsibility very quickly, and I felt really amazing. Okay, so everything so far is going well. Let's say it lasts like a year. Things started to get what I would call really hairy. That's like an English expression. Yeah. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's like when my endometriosis symptoms started flaring up. And, you know, I kind of really pride myself on like transparency, so I'll just, you know, I'll kind of say like why that happened, and yeah, essentially I had a kind of a physical allergic reaction to my IUD. It's called the Mirena, that was fitted as part of my kind of treatment. I was really struggling with my symptoms of very, very bad and very acute chronic pain. And it wasn't a kind of treatment option that I actually wanted. It's not that it just wouldn't be like my first choice. It's not like a preference for me. It's just it's very invasive and that kind of thing. But I kind of felt like I didn't have a choice. And again, like at that point in my life, I was very just dependent on kind of what my doctor at the time told me was the best thing for me, right? And I was living this very fast-paced life, and I think I was very much going on the give me a quick solution. That sounds very extreme, but if you tell me that's the best thing, I won't really question you too much, even though I probably did at the time, and let's just go with that. And that actually was incredible for about 8 months, until my body essentially started rejecting it and having this like full-blown allergic reaction. And I had no idea what was happening to me, but I became very, very sick very, very quickly. And let's just say, as much as I wish this wasn't the case, but I don't think the corporate world, or I really don't believe the corporate world, is a very chronically ill-friendly place. Mm-hmm. And I think this is kind of where like everything I've said so far about my programming and my way of like dealing with life and maybe like my personality, that whole thing, it's suddenly where I was kind of facing this almost like this new version of myself. Like I'd always been this like hyper success oriented, capable, you know, like successful woman in a kind of male dominated industry, male dominated culture, especially in England. It's very much like that. And I kind of found myself waking up and just either being too sick to go to work. I think the first, I had to take, I want to say like a month and a half off work. And I was mentally really not prepared to deal with, firstly, like standing up for myself and saying like, I need this time off work, and not putting pressure on myself to go back as soon as possible, not really being the type of person who'd ever learned that. I think my self-worth was very linked with my achievements. Mm-hmm. That's also a big part of that story. So when I couldn't achieve anymore, my self-worth took a really big hit, and that's where my mental health alongside my physical health started to really suffer. I think this was still relatively towards the beginning of everything. So let's just say a string of events in that first kind of working environment led me to start looking for jobs that didn't kind of, I want to say, just like make me feel so terrible about myself. And I think, again, like I really am an empath. I'd see that as one of my superpowers. But actually, when you are a young adult without much experience of the world, which is exactly who I was, wanting to, you know, be the best employee that you can be for the company that you care about. And anyway, I decided to leave that job in search for a more positive work environment, right?
I know on the show we haven't had a segment about endometriosis. Can you give us a little bit about your symptoms that you were experiencing?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, endometriosis, just to explain this in very like simple terms, it's a chronic health condition. In many cases it's genetic, and it impacts people with, and I want to say this and be like encompassing of everyone who can have endometriosis. So it would be people who menstruate, right? Can have can suffer from endometriosis, and essentially it's where cells similar to the lining of the womb grow outside of the womb, and therefore are impacted. They are essentially impacted by the same hormonal cycle, but when those cells swell, for example, they have nowhere to go, and that causes extreme inflammation and pain. I mean, people can have endometriosis in their bowel all the way up to their lungs. I mean, it really is like a full body condition, and it has 4 stages. A bit like cancer, there's stage 1 to 4, and it is only it's quite difficult to diagnose. The average time frame of diagnosis is 7 years. I was very lucky. I was diagnosed very early, but it's really, and it either affects 1 to 10 women in the world or in the UK. I'm not 100% sure about that statistic, but I definitely know it's in the UK that it impacts 1 in 10 women. And yeah, it runs in my family. So for me, when my symptoms were extreme fatigue. So when things were really bad, so just to put this into context, in 2019, during the time that I've been describing, there were days where I was weeks and months where I was completely bedbound. There were days where I needed a wheelchair to be able to leave my house, and I needed assistance. There were days where I relied on my parents or my boyfriend as a carer. I couldn't go to the supermarket. And the fatigue got so bad that honestly breathing and talking felt like really quite challenging. And it's the pain more than anything that is so debilitating. You get really bad brain fog, and like the fatigue makes it hard to, you know, do things like work or manage a team, or, you know, even do things like this. But the pain basically means that you just completely shut down. You're in so much pain that you physically cannot move. And it meant that I was relying on very, very heavy painkillers. And I had, you know, really terrible instances, for example, where I would be having to change my medication ever so slightly based on what my doctor has said. And I would be walking to work in the morning, and there was one particular instance where I blacked out in the street from pain, and I had to crawl, like army crawl, into a cafe. And it's London, so this is going to sound really strange, but no one stopped. It's a very anonymous city, like no one really stopped to help me. And again, with endometriosis, you think, you know, now, in fact, no, I'm not even going to say that, because I don't know what I would do now, because the problem is, if you call an ambulance, you go to A&E in London. That's a public service. So you can be waiting for up to 8 hours, and then you'll see somebody and they'll say, well, it's just bad period pains, or like take some painkillers. So I think there are a lot of people with different conditions who will resonate with that, in the sense of, if I go to the emergency room, no one can do anything because this is a chronic health condition. And at the end of the day, I probably should just go to bed. And I was very lucky. My support system at the time, I had an incredible friend who literally left her work and got in a taxi and an Uber and came and picked me up and took me home. But I don't know what I would have done, without that incredible, beacon of light in my life even. So, and then it's kind of explaining to your work, my period pains are so bad that I collapsed on the street and now I'm in bed and I can't work. But actually I'm also really suffering from fatigue and can hardly string a sentence together. I think that's the thing, is in these corporate environments, and I can only speak from that perspective because I haven't worked in other sectors, but it is very difficult sometimes to get the recognition and validation and almost sincerity, because it's a women's health, people see it as just bad period pains. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is a little bit about endometriosis and kind of how it was impacting me. But it was mainly the pain, extreme inflammation and bloating, and then the brain fog and the fatigue that really were making my life very difficult.
Wow. Very, very, that does sound very painful. So you're dealing with these symptoms. You've decided to find another job that can kind of handle, where you can still live with your symptoms and work at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So you were successfully at finding this job, right?
Yes, I was successful, and again, it was my dream job, and I was fantastic. I'm essentially moving from somewhere that has a pharmaceutical department that I was, helping sort of co-lead at the time, and I'm going to move to somewhere that is 100% specialized in this field. And I knew, having gone for my interviews there, that they had a client that was how to put this, an endometriosis related pharmaceutical client. And when I went to I kind of made this promise to myself. I said to myself, I think this was what I believed. I've been in an environment that hasn't understood me due to a lack of knowledge. I'm going to put it down to that, right? And so I said to myself, I'm going to be really open about my condition, and I'm going to make it abundantly clear. I'm going to have it in writing throughout the whole interview process, and then I'll be safe. I'll go to this place, they'll know about me, they know how bad the condition is because they've got this client, they've done work in that sector, and then things will be okay, right? And it's interesting because that was that did happen, and also that didn't happen, and I'll kind of tell this part of the story. So, I mean, under the laws, at least in England, the way that endometriosis impacts you classifies you as a disabled employee, right? Mm-hmm. And that's also really interesting because if you try, for example, to then get support from, let's say if I couldn't work, which has happened to me before because of my symptoms, and that's kind of how I ended up leaving everything completely, leaving the corporate world and starting my own business. But endometriosis, again, is a gray area of do you qualify for disability benefits, but do you not? And it's there's not really an answer. And basically the answer is no, because there's this whole gray area. And I'd say endometriosis very much falls into that gray area of again, we don't know what to do with you in A&E or the emergency room. We don't know how to treat you at work. We don't, So anyway, I got this new job and I was very, very open about it. So I joined and I thought I was safe. And the reason that I say yes and no is because this is where the more, I would say, stereotypical burnout situation started happening. Again, it was a small company. I think, again, as a personality, I wanted to really make an impact, and I wasn't afraid of responsibility, and I like close-knit family settings, right? So I was attracted to the smaller companies, not the big corporate machines. Let's say we suddenly won a lot of work. It would mean that for a certain amount of time, everybody would have to work a little bit harder, because we might only be able to hire like that extra team after a few weeks, right? Because that's kind of how you work in a smaller company. And I think that's just something that you know when you sign up, and that's okay. I think, you know, as humans, when we're healthy, we are resilient. We can, for our exams, like study a little bit harder, or, you know, but we do need rest. And this is where I would say, yeah, the more stereotypical burnout scenario came about, because very quickly when COVID hit, I don't necessarily know if COVID hit and suddenly we had lots more work. I don't necessarily think, you know, at the beginning I was already working very, very hard, and I think it became quite clear, at least pretty early on, that I don't want to say we were understaffed, but we were definitely working at maximum capacity, like really quite hard. And then I remember distinctly there was a point once the pandemic had hit and we had to go and start working from home, that I was starting work at about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was finishing at about 10, 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't have time to eat or exercise. And that went on, I want to say, for at least 6 months. And obviously, I did have the weekends completely off, and this is where, again, everything started to kind of come together. I mean, people talk about like the Sunday scaries. I was finishing work on a Friday and being filled with anxiety about having to go back to work on the Monday. Like, so I don't think, again, that I was actually resting over the course of the weekend, even though I know that there are people out there, firstly, working longer hours than me and also working over the weekends, right? But still, it was a lot. And I think the already being isolated at home and like not working with a team, not having the kind of, I was staying with my family in England at the time, because my immediate family lived in South Africa, not having that like interaction time over lunch, even if it was a case of like running downstairs and having a tiny little something to eat, but at like 3 because of my job, it just made me feel very alone. And very, very quickly, again, my endometriosis symptoms are triggered by stress and like overworking. And I was incredibly stressed and I was incredibly overworked. And it meant that I was getting very, very, very frequent flare-ups. And looking back, I should, and I wish that I had done, I just didn't have the confidence or the knowledge at the time. I wish I had stood up for myself and said, it's not normal for us to be working so hard for such a long period of time. You know, we need to hire more people because this is not sustainable. And the reason that I am having so many flare-ups and therefore having to take so much time off work is because of these things. Like, they're connected, right? Rather than it's just me that's the problem. But I just didn't say anything, which again just goes back to, I didn't really feel safe to do that. I think that, my role within that company, I managed a team, quite a large team. And so as that manager, I would hear things from people about, them struggling with the workload or the hours and that kind of thing. But no, it was almost like not strength in numbers. Like, everybody was too scared to say something. And I think in my particular situation, and this is actually very common now from me reaching out and speaking and connecting with people who have also suffered workplace burnout, there's often a very toxic manager involved in the scenario. And that was very, very much the case for me. And it made me feel incredibly trapped, and probably had the biggest impact on my mental health decline, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that's the little other chunk of the story.
So talk to us about, like, so now you're experiencing all of this at your job, and you know that your endometriosis cannot handle the impact of your job and the workload that you have. What was it like to come to the realization that I've got to leave this job? Like, that's it. Like, I've got to be done with this.
Yeah, I think for me, I was very lucky. I, as I said, I was living with family at the time, and so British culture is very much, you know, sort of a sweep it under the carpet situation. So I think they also found it very challenging to see me declining mentally and physically, and weren't really sure what to do. And I think, again, there's only so much that other people, I think, you know, it makes sense that perhaps other people don't almost put their opinions on you. And I think this is where things were really difficult for me. I was in a situation where I don't think I could really see clearly what was best for me, and I was incredibly afraid. And I didn't have any mental health support at the time with somebody who was, let's say, trained, or somebody who could give me objective, you know, had that kind of ability to say, actually, from a clinical perspective, this is bad for you. Because if a family member says that, it's sort of like, well, maybe they feel like they're putting a lot of pressure on you to make a decision based on their values, maybe not your values. And so it is just this really difficult, isolated situation.
And I'm sorry to cut you off. Do you know at this point in time what stage of endometriosis you had?
Oh, good question. No, I can't tell you off the top of my head. I can't tell you off the top of my head. Unfortunately. All I can tell you is that they were the worst recurring symptoms in terms of impacting my quality of life and ability to do everyday things that I'd ever experienced. And they were the most, I was having a flare up, I'd say, every 3 weeks, and they were wiping me out for about 2 weeks.
Wow.
So it was bad. And I was becoming increasingly more aware, like hyper aware, that I was having to ask for time off. And in return, I think I was overcompensating by actually working when I really couldn't. And whilst one of the things that I've had to come to the realization of, like, since this whole chapter of my life is past, is that I didn't stand up for myself. And I think I had this belief that when people saw me, for example, showing up on Zoom as sick as I was, that someone would say, you are too sick to work, you need to stop, and someone would protect me and defend me. But this is where this is an adult world. If you're showing up and you're saying that you're well enough to work, like, people will take advantage of that, even though that sounds bad, you know. And I just fundamentally did not have the confidence to just put my foot down and say, you're pressuring me to show up today and I'm fundamentally not well enough, leave me alone. Don't message me, don't email me, don't send me abusive anything, you know. If you have an issue, then I'll get a lawyer, you know. That's kind of really what I should have been doing.
Let's go back to the story as it progresses. I know I keep segueing out of it because I have so many other questions outside of it. So you're getting ready to head off. What are you doing next?
So essentially, so I did eventually have a family member who I'm very close with, it's my cousin, say to me, I've kept quiet because I didn't feel it was my place, but I've fundamentally never seen you so far away from who I know you to be. Like, she didn't even say, I've never seen you so sick, I've never seen you so depressed. She just said, like, you have almost lost the entire essence of who you are as a person. I think you should quit. And it sounds ridiculous looking back, but I can acknowledge now that I didn't have the courage to put myself first. And that was something that, again, I've had to work on a lot. But this is the thing, a lot of people who get chronic symptoms of all kinds are very capable, hardworking people. Therefore, when the symptoms hit and you can no longer be the person that you've always known yourself to be, the thing that is impacted the most is your self-worth and your identity. And when you're navigating those two things, there is not actually a lot of confidence to go around. And when people at work start telling you that you are a burden and that you are not good enough and that you're letting your team down, it's very difficult to not swallow that pill as truth, right? Because you've already got all of these doubts going on around your own self-worth and your own identity already. It's kind of like losing who you are and being in a constant battle with your own body. So I think that's the thing, I needed an external permission slip that really I should have given myself to say enough is enough. I will not put myself through this anymore because I love myself and I know that this is wrong. That's what it came down to. I know that this is wrong and I will not put myself through it anymore. The same way that I would defend a friend or my younger sister and I'd let myself essentially be abused and mistreated for months on end. Things needed to change. And that day, I put in my letter of resignation. This again is where things got very hairy, but they're not so much due. I don't know necessarily how relevant it is to workplace burnout. It's more, let's just say that the process of me actually leaving that company, because I was really good at my job. People valued that, my clients valued me. And I think actually when I first joined my company, I had a lot of external recognition from clients who specifically wanted to work with me and not necessarily my manager. And there is definitely within the corporate space, particularly with people of the same gender, and I can't speak for men, but I know a lot of people who have suffered greatly due to women on women, like managee, is that a word? Like management, toxic competition. And I'm certain that stems from a whole host of past patriarchal, not good stuff. But that played a big role. You know, suddenly the person beneath you starts succeeding and getting recognition that you're not getting. And you know, whether it's subconscious or conscious, what can you do to safeguard your role in that company and the natural emotions that come up that maybe you can't control? I'm being very nice here because, again, that's my disposition that got me in a lot of trouble, not putting myself first and not defending myself. It meant that then when I resigned, obviously they didn't want me to leave, which I think speaks volumes for actually how sick I was and how much time I was needing to take off. But things after that got very, very hairy, and I did eventually, like, put it this way, the company said that they would put certain measures in place to take me away from this toxic manager that I was working under, and it took too long to happen, so I was still suffering, and then I was sort of just not well looked after, so sort of like the promises that made were not, what's the word? Sorry?
Being fulfilled.
Exactly. Thankfully I eventually had the strength to leave. But I think that I would say that the hardest period for me was between my initial resignation and then when I left. I think let's say I resigned initially in, really don't know if this is 100%, I don't know the exact date, but I think it was around, I want to say August. I actually do think that's factually correct. And I didn't end up leaving physically until November. And that for me was definitely the hardest period because it was where I hit rock bottom mentally and physically. And I think as tough as it is for me to say this because of all the trauma around it, and not feeling safe to kind of tell this story because of how I was treated in the work environment. But I do, hand on heart, feel that at the end, their strategy with me was to make me so unhappy that I decided to leave off my own back rather than them finding a way to get rid of me. And that is exactly what happened. And yeah, that was the end of that chapter in my life. I actually decided I quit my corporate job. I ended a 2.5-year relationship, and I left a new lease that I just started. I think I was 1 month into it in London, and I bought a one-way ticket to South Africa. I had to find a way to I've got a little sausage dog, get her out here as well.
Yes.
And I just, I think it's hands down the hardest decision I've ever made, and the scariest, because I was literally taking a leap into the unknown, but it's the best thing I've ever done for myself. And I think it was that huge reclamation of, you are worthy. You are worth everything in the world. You are inherently worthy of everything that you want, and you will leave this situation that is making you incredibly ill, and you will go and make a better life for yourself. And now I'm completely healed from my symptoms. I have this amazing business, and essentially, help people, not necessarily in the same situation as me, but I help people get well and stay well. Yeah.
Awesome. This is an incredible story. I want to move into our portion of advice. Do you have 5 pieces of advice for someone going through similar situations that you went through?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a good question. I know that, I guess the story that I've told, I think that one of the important things to kind of say about this is, I think within at least maybe the perception or even the reality of chronic illness and work, I think there's a reality and also a preconception or a conception that perhaps chronically ill people are either not working at all, or their symptoms aren't bad enough that they are working, right? It's almost like this polarized situation. But like, I was somebody who was too sick to work, working full time. And it's really important for me to kind of highlight that, because I don't know, and I don't necessarily think that there may be that many people who are in that situation. And it's so important for me to kind of, speak to that little portion maybe of like those few people in that situation, and just say, like, you're not alone, and there are other people who are kind of going through the same thing. And so that advice, or this advice at least, is specifically for people like, or particularly for those people in that situation. I think I'll start with almost like the most painful or like, advice which I would have given myself is, please just take a moment and take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask yourself, in what ways are you contributing to this situation? And it is so tough, but at the end of the day, looking back, I let myself be mistreated, and just look at the ways in which you are contributing. And that's the hardest thing to do, and it might not even be possible. And so that kind of leads me on to my second piece of advice, which is, if you can't answer that question by yourself, which is kind of going to be the key to getting you better and finding your freedom again and just being okay, and maybe leaving a toxic situation, get support with somebody who can help you answer that question. Because learn from my story, it's not a case of leaving one job and going to another. The conditioning and the lessons that you need to learn that have led to the development of your symptoms and have led to you tolerating the situation that you're currently in they won't leave you until you work through them, until you understand them, right? So it's almost like I'm going in reverse order of like simple steps to like the biggest steps, but I'm starting with those because those are the ones that will have the most impact. My third piece of advice is don't necessarily expect HR to solve all your problems and like be all over it and stand up for you and even understand your chronic health condition or whatever. Even if you don't have one, don't expect them to be on your side, but do not let that dissuade you or in any way impact your perception of the situation. It is still wrong. It is still not okay. And just because HR doesn't understand doesn't invalidate everything that's happening to you. Stay strong and look for a way that, look for someone who does understand. Okay. My fourth piece of my fourth piece of advice is don't suffer in silence. And I know that's related to my last piece of information, but keep telling people, even if somebody is watching this video and they feel they have no one to talk to, like reach out to Dawn or reach out to me. Just keep going until you find someone who listens to you and who gives you that space to really open up about what's going on for you, even if they don't know how to help you or to give advice. And I guess that's a piece of advice for other people. You don't know how unbelievably, people external to this situation, how life-changing it can be for somebody to just be heard. I think we grow up in society thinking that when somebody tells you something or opens up about something that they're struggling with, that we have to give advice or solutions. Sometimes holding space and letting that person be seen and heard and speak their truth is so, so powerful. And then my final piece of advice would be leave. I know it sounds crazy, but at the end of the day, as somebody who stayed in an incredibly toxic situation for so long because I was weighing up the costs of how will I pay my bills? I've worked my whole life for this moment and now I'm being mistreated and I'm the one who's suddenly gonna like take the whole, the brunt of everything that's going on. I'm gonna run away from the situation. Everything I was telling myself, I wasn't looking like at the cost of, the non-materialistic costs of what is this costing my health? What is this costing my mental health? What is this costing in terms of my relationships? What is this costing in terms of my self-worth, my identity,
quality of life.
Yeah, my quality of life, my view of who I was, how I know that's self-worth, but it's almost like who I knew myself to be and how much that would impact it, even the trauma, the internalized trauma, how much I withstood, all of the things that would impact me later on that weren't materialistic, but I wasn't taking those things into consideration. Please do. They are just as important. Your bills are not more important than your identity and your self-worth. And actually I have a sixth piece of advice, a cheeky one to throw
for the bonus.
And this will be different for every single country, but I was so incredibly naive to the government support out there for people who are unemployed. And what I didn't realize is because I hadn't been fired, I didn't realize that when I left my job by choice, that I still fell under the category of unemployed. It sounds really stupid, but because I felt like I'd chosen it, I didn't feel like I had almost the same rights as like people who, poor person, they've lost their job, they're supporting a family. It just never crossed my mind to ever look at things like that. And I was very lucky I was able to get support from family and that kind of thing. But if you're not in that situation and this is new to you, just do look into it, because just because you are unable to work because of your health, or you choose to be unemployed because you are in such an abusive environment, don't let your bills and your house, your rent be the reason that you stay. If you can find a way to get, financial support from other places.
I'm really glad you shared that, because I didn't know. I thought you had to be fired to get government assistance. So I didn't know there were
I don't know about the US, but in England,
something to look into though,
Yeah, I mean, but in England, this is the thing. Unemployment is unemployment. Like, now in my work, obviously this is a big thing that's come up for me. And I know fundamentally that they don't discriminate against people. It doesn't matter how it is that you lost your job. And this was a big mindset thing for me. Yes, I chose to leave, but actually the person who lost their job was still me. Do you see what I mean? Because I didn't feel like I had a choice. I didn't feel like I could stay. And actually leaving was almost just as painful as being fired. And maybe that's triggering for people who've lost their jobs, but it is the truth from somebody who's suffered greatly in their job due to chronic illness. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing those pieces of advice. I think they were all very valuable, and can be used, even by somebody like me. Like I'm not experiencing burnout per se, but sometimes when I have flare-ups with my own, health, I find it difficult to tell my supervisor, okay, I'm not going to be able to handle it. Like, because in the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't want to be that weak woman on the team. Like, I never want to be the weakest link or whatever, like behind in my work, because I felt I was too, sick to come in. But sometimes you do have to advocate for yourself and let yourself know, like, you can give yourself this day. Like, your body needs it at this point, because you going in is going to be even worse than you staying in bed and resting your brain, resting your mind, resting your flare-ups and things like that. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your transparency on the show, and coming on the show for one. So I do thank you for that and taking time out of your day to share your thoughts and things. Did you want to say anything before we ran into prayer?
Oh, I just want to say, again, like it's an absolute pleasure, and really I am honored to be invited to share my story. For anyone watching this, it's the first time I've ever shared that story, because it was very traumatic, and it's taken me a long time to kind of disassociate from the almost the fear of, speaking my truth. I think that a lot of us, having gone through these kinds of things, do feel, even if it's self-silenced, there's a lot of fear of speaking out about how you were treated for fear of people. I don't know. To be honest, I don't even know what the fear is, but you do feel like you can't really speak up about what happened to you. And I think it's a kind of, like the School of Rock, like a stick it to the man situation. Like, you know what? I can't help it that you ran your company in a terrible way, and this is what happened to me. And I'm no longer going to be a silent victim, and I will advocate for myself and for other people, because this, this kind of conversation would have changed my life at the time where I was going through this kind of thing. And if I have to be brave now that I am, and can speak up for people, then I will 100% do that. So I just want to say, thank you so much. And final little thing, just off the back of what you said, I think the wider, other than people like me and people like you creating these safe spaces where we can have these conversations, which is so powerful, a whole other topic that really needs to be addressed, and I think this will happen and is kind of happening, but corporate culture and our understanding of how chronically ill people, like where they fit in and how they can be protected and valued. We have so much to give. Our health is just maybe not as reliable, but therefore we need flexibility to be able to give from a full cup, and we should not be discriminated against. I mean, I really see this as like, women used to be discriminated against, and, people of different races used to be discriminated, still are. In fact, I'm not even say used to, it used to be worse, they still are, but this is the same. It is still discrimination. We still need people to stand up for us and help us find our way of contributing and feeling fulfilled in society, right? Just because someone has a chronic illness doesn't mean that they should be shunned from, you know, from these kind of places. In fact, we need diversity in these corporate spaces, especially in the world of, I mean, can you believe that I worked in healthcare and this happened to me within the healthcare space? That was for me also like blew my mind, like
the irony of it all.
So that's it. It's just opening up these conversations and changing people's perspectives around chronic illness, particularly from an employment point of view.
Wow. Thank you so much. So many valuable pieces of information being dropped here. Nuggets of knowledge is what I call them. Nuggets of knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to enter a time of a quick prayer, and then we're going to wrap up this segment. Lord, I thank you for the day. I thank you for Octavia. Please bless her life, bless her family, bless her endeavors with her business, God. And I ask that you cover all the listeners that are listening right now, the ones who are watching, who are going through something. Give them strength. We just ask you for strength, God. We ask you for strength on behalf of them, that they may stand up for themselves, they may advocate for themselves, that they may speak on their own behalfs, Lord. And if they can't, that you provide someone, that you put someone in their midst that can and will and unapologetically stand up for them. God, I thank you for the lives that are watching today, for the lives that will be changed through this segment. And I ask all this in your name, Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for coming on the show, for your transparency. And thank you all for watching. Come back next Saturday for another segment with another great guest. And as always, guys, it's time to have these conversations, the hard ones.